Hello, and welcome to the Washington Monthly. I'm your host, Ann Kim.
And I'm your co-host, Garrett Epps.
In this episode, will Canada and the United States ever be friends again?
Relations with Canada are the worst in modern history. And there's no one who has studied it that would disagree with what I've said, especially the Canadians. So it's tragic. It's not just trade disputes, but it's the rhetoric of the president. It's the tone and the attitude which has Canadians losing total faith in us and wondering what's going on in the United States.
Our guest is Ambassador James Blanchard. He was the ambassador to Canada during the administration of President Bill Clinton. Ambassador Blanchard also served 2 terms as the governor of Michigan and 4 terms as a member of the United States Congress. Welcome, Ambassador. It's so great to have you with us today.
Thank you.
So, Ambassador, you were the U.S. ambassador to Canada during the Clinton administration. In fact, during the ratification of NAFTA, incredibly crucial time in the relationship between our countries. And before then, you served as 2 terms as governor of Michigan, a state that also has deep ties to Canada, including most significantly through the U.S. auto industry. So, just for context, how would you characterize the current state of U.S.-Canada relations, especially as compared to what you experienced as ambassador?
Well, I would say this. I'm a student of history as well. And actually, I worked with Canada when I was a member of Congress before being governor. U.S. relations with Canada are the worst in modern history. And there's no one who has studied it that would disagree with what I've said, especially the Canadians. So it's tragic. It's not just trade disputes. We've always had those, or the tariffs, which are, of course, mostly unjustified and foolish. But it's the rhetoric of the president, whether he wants to refer them as 51st state or say they're nasty, or, Vice President Vance saying the Canadians have treated us very badly these last few decades. He hasn't even lived long enough to know that. Or Howard Lutnick's foolish statements. It's the tone and the attitude which has Canadians losing total faith in us and wondering what's going on in the United States. And I do a lot of Canadian interviews, and I mention to Canadians that most Americans consider Canada our best friend and ally and partner, and they should disregard the rhetoric from the top. Our concern is the Senate isn't standing up, although they have passed resolutions supporting Canada narrowly, but they have done that, unlike other measures.
Well, I think a lot of people in this country got a kick out of the elections in Canada and the idea that the slogan was elbows up, which, of course, Americans didn't know what it meant until then. But the question, I guess, is whether elbows up is going to work for Canada, whether they really can withstand what's coming at them. We have a situation where a president, if he doesn't like a commercial on TV, tries to slap a 10% tariff on all your goods. The United States, obviously economically much more powerful than Canada. How is this going to play out in your judgment?
Well, it's hard to know. Let me backtrack just one moment, though, to say relations were very good during the Clinton years. And the Canadians, they didn't know him when he got elected, and they were a little worried he was a Southerner. And they really liked Bush and Reagan. But their natural inclination is to be liberal. And once they got to know Clinton, and they still do, they loved him. So it was great being his ambassador there. We dealt with NAFTA. We dealt with open skies. We dealt with the Quebec referendum. So it was a critical time, and Clinton was fabulous. So things were it was probably the golden era now that we look back. With what's going to happen now, by the way, I love that commercial, the Reagan commercial. And I think if they don't get a deal, they ought to start playing it again. I really do, in some key markets. Because that obviously was getting the Republicans totally in Congress rattled. We have an integrated economy with Canada. It's not just autos, it's energy, it's agriculture, it's steel and aluminum, it's everything. And we actually have a surplus on trade with Canada on almost everything, really, except energy. And we need that energy. We're the largest producer of crude oil on the planet now. But our refineries can't use our new light crude, so we export it. Our refineries are set up for Canadian heavy crude, so we're dependent on Canada for energy. Canada could, by the way, I think they could call power outages in New England if they pulled Hydro-Quebec back. So they have cards to play, but they don't want to do that. I mean, they're 10% of our population, so we simply have a lot more leverage than they do, and that makes it hard.
Yeah. And what's been the impact of the tariffs on the Canadian economy? Is my understanding is that the Canadian economy is actually suffering fairly badly, and with the U.S. auto factories, I'm sorry, with the U.S. automakers beginning to move production out of Canada back into the United States, what is the impact you're seeing, and is that going to
Yeah.
affect the strategy long term for Canadians?
Well, I think it's causing inflation in Canada and here, despite what the president says. It's going to raise car prices, probably then lead to fewer sales, layoffs. There may be some movement. They're talking about it from Canada to the U.S. There's always shuffling back and forth. But when you have a totally integrated economy in terms of its parts and suppliers as well as assembly, a lot is still going to happen in Canada.
Hmm.
And I don't think you're going to see any auto company wanting to build a new plant in the United States at the expense of Canada because it takes several years, and the president, Mr. Trump, is not going to be there. And it's hard to believe any future president would be so foolish to deal with our number one customer that way. I think it would just, I think, unrealistic. We're too integrated, and that's not going to change. Geography is not going to change. And manufacturing is changing, but it changes with automation and robots. And the major reason, by the way, for the reduction in auto workers has been automation. It's to some degree bad management. It wasn't nearly as much trade.
Right.
Well, along with negative effects, Trump has really benefited some people. And for example, Jimmy Kimmel, I think, is extremely grateful to the president. And another one might be Mark Carney, who was considered not to be a very strong candidate until Trump decided to involve himself in Canadian things. How do you rate his performance as prime minister and dealing with, what is obviously a very serious crisis for that country?
Yeah, it's hard to find fault. I think steady as you go is probably his motto, and I think that's what Canada needs to do, not overreact to every little thing that comes up. It's true, he would not be prime minister but for Trump's attacks on Canada. The Liberal Party in last December was slated in January for a major defeat. People like to change parties after a few years, not just here, but in Canada. So the Conservatives were 20 points ahead in like December and January. And once Mr. Trump started attacking Canada, making jokes and saying they're a national security threat, which of course is baloney, and all these other stupid remarks, uh, you know, uh, and at that moment, the Liberal Party wanted Justin Trudeau to step down. He'd been there a long time. And that may or may not have hastened his stepping down. I doubt it. He was going to step down anyway. But whoever was going to succeed Trudeau in the Liberal Party was probably going to lose by 20 points. But no, Mark Carney gets the nomination at the Liberal convention, and his numbers just skyrocket. And so, yeah, I mean, Trump joked with Carney, I helped elect you. It's true. I don't think there would have been a Liberal prime minister in Canada. Liberal, by the way, in U.S. terms, would be moderate Democrat. I don't think there would have been a Liberal prime minister in Canada, but for Trump's craziness. I don't. How's he doing? He's got a weak hand, actually, just because we're 10 times bigger. But I think okay. I'm not sure I would have apologized, however, privately about the Reagan commercial because that was Ontario, and Doug Ford has been his ally, the premier of Ontario. On the other hand, they could redo that ad. If things keep, if 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 the agreement doesn't get worked out, and they were really kind of close to one before that ad, they were. I know that from inside information. If they don't get an agreement, if they could start running that ad in New York and Florida and Texas and all over. I'm telling you, it's devastating. And they know it. So they could do that. I almost wish they would. But I think wiser minds say, let things cool off. They'll work. They should be able to work something out. and let things cool off. I don't. The problem is that we have people around Trump who feed him so much misinformation. I mean, I mentioned to people it's crackpot economics. I mean, Trump is still out there trying to tell people that other countries pay the tariffs, when of course we pay the tariffs, our consumers. He's still trying to act like Canada is a national security threat, which nobody believes. So, or that the European Union was formed to take advantage of the U.S., which of course is not true. So,
Well,
we have a problem.
imagine what the trade situation would be today if the Blue Jays had won the series. I think that might have really just torn the whole thing.
Everybody I know, because they all know how much I care about Canada. They were all rooting for Toronto. They almost won. I feel bad. I have nothing against the Dodgers. Magic Johnson, Spartan alumni, is a part owner, but I wanted the Blue Jays to win. Trump would have gone crazy.
Trump would have gone insane.
Crazy.
He would have called up the commissioner, Manfred, was his name, Rob Manfred, and asked him to remove the Blue Jays from
Exactly,
MLB. Yeah, he would have gone nuts.
Well, he'd also ask for a recount. He'd say, they counted the runs
was
wrong.
rigged. Right.
Yeah, I know. It's sad. It's humorous. It really is humorous. But we think about the consequences. It's tragic. I mean, I tell Canadians, look, I said, you feel bad. How do you think we feel here in the United States? We have a guy who is not well. And even when he was well, he was acting crazy all the time. He doesn't speak for us.
Yeah. Now, Ambassador, how do you see the end game for the trade relationship, at least with the U.S. and Canada? During his first term in office, he renegotiated NAFTA into what's now USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement. That agreement expires in 2036 unless the three countries agree to extend it next year. It's my understanding, for an additional 16-year period. So given everything that's happening, what's your expectation about the fate of those negotiations next year and then USMCA in general?
Well, again, no one really knows, because the responsible officials, including our trade rep, they know better. I mean, Lutnick doesn't. Lutnick is doing a performance for Trump when he does a TV commercial. In fact, most of the cabinet, they're not talking to you and me or the Canadians. They're talking to Trump, because he might be watching a snooze flipper. So, it's the whims of the people who prod Mr. Trump that are the problem. I think they'll settle down and get what is a similar agreement to what they currently have. I think they will cite some U.S. auto companies who say they're expanding in the U.S. and to help the president, and they'll announce several billions of dollars of investment, and he will hold that up as a major victory, even though they probably were going to make those investments anyway. And we'll get back to what I hope will be the normal trading relationship, which is very positive and very productive. The big thing would be for them to drop the tariff on steel and aluminum currently, because that's doing is adding costs to the auto companies and car prices. It's totally unnecessary. The market is completely integrated. In fact, until recent years, the head of the United Steelworkers was a Canadian from Toronto. So, I mean, it tells you about the degree of integration. So they really need to deal with that, because the auto companies, they will privately say it's just a massive increase on their costs. In 1 year, it's like $1 billion for General Motors, Ford Motor, maybe $800 million. So they need to get that one under control sooner than later.
Well, that brings up a question that was been on my mind, and I've talked to Ann about it, and that is, are these tariffs helping anybody in the United States? Now, let's leave Canada for one side. Like, they're supposedly the America first. Are the tariffs, from what you said, they're not helping the auto industry. Is anybody benefiting?
They're not helping consumers or the auto companies at all, and they're probably going to end up hurting the auto workers, because sales will drop and then layoffs will occur. I have read, like from serious economists, that the steel workers would gain some thousands of new jobs, but the offset losses would be 10 times that. But I have heard from respected sources that the steel workers, perhaps in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, will gain jobs, thousands, not hundreds of thousands, thousands. And that will be offset by hundreds of thousands of layoffs and increased costs elsewhere. So it's 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 bad. Then you look at like soybeans. We China cuts off the soybeans. So what does Trump do? He'll pay the farmers for their losses with the tariff money that they've already paid. I mean, it's just a shell game. That's why I say it's crackpot economics. And I think Trump has finally convinced himself these foreign countries actually pay the tariffs, not us.
He does clearly believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Peter Navarro had told him that if you raise the tariffs enough, we wouldn't have to have income taxes. And it goes back to William McKinley. I think you're aware of all that. And so I said,
Yes.
well, that was really great. The Gilded Age or whatever. That was really neat. Yeah, except that everybody was not doing well.
Yeah, and blood
No,
was running
certainly
in the
not.
streets from labor
I don't know,
unrest.
but it's a strange time, and I'm a big fan of Canada. But I'll tell you, you know, somebody say, "Is there something you don't like about the Canadians?" Not really. They're polite, civilized, good, peace-loving, hardworking, authentic, genuine, loyal. They are a bunch of nitpickers on stuff with us. I don't think they will be anymore, but they nitpick each other more, whether they argue about Quebec or the different provinces argue about Ottawa. I mean, it's more of a decentralized government, like our Articles of Confederation, which didn't work, I might add.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I say they're harder on themselves than they are on us. But I know a lot of our negotiators think they're nitpickers. That's because their public is watching them, and they don't want to see their negotiators get bullied by Uncle Sam. I mean, it's really domestic politics. And that's a problem right now for Carney. He's got to show that he's the grown-up in the room, which he is, and that he's not babying Baby Huey more than he should.
So what will it take to rebuild the US-Canada relationship? Is there a long-term damage that's been done, or will the departure of Trump be enough to kind of, flip a switch and we back to the way things were? And then related to that, what would your advice be to the next president, assuming that it's not J.D. Vance, and the restoration of US-Canada relationship is one of their goals?
Well, by the way, I think our trade rep, Jameson Greer, knows what I'm saying. So he's actually somebody with experience to deal with this. They're going to have to settle down and get an agreement. I mean, they were going to renew or assess the Canada-Mexico or U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement next year anyway. So as part of that, they need to just finalize it now. If Trump leaves office, for example, the 25th Amendment, I don't think that's out of the question, by the way, then there might be a better chance with J.D. Vance, but he's made a lot of foolish statements about Canada that are not true. And I always say it's one thing for him to do that as a Yale Law Review graduate, but to be an Ohio State graduate, he should know something about Canada. Anyway, the next president is going to have to, frankly, get on a plane right away and fly to Ottawa and say, we're back. Now, Biden tried to do that, with Europe right after he won, but people were so worried that he would be the aberration, not Trump. And unfortunately, Canadians and the Europeans and all of our friends everywhere, I don't care where it is saying, we're worried about the American voter. What are they doing? Why are they taking for granted all their prosperity and security for the last 80 years? Why are they doing that? Are they a bunch of dummies? And the answer is they just have taken everything for granted. Yeah, some of that 30% that loves Trump, they're not all that. They don't follow politics. They don't know much about politics. They're just happy somebody's telling them what to think. But, the rest of the world is going to worry about us. And, we can have the best president on the planet go up there in 3 years, and they're going to say, we believe you, we love you, we're glad you're back, but we're still going to worry about your voters until we see some continuity here. of
Yeah.
policy. I mean, they loved Biden and worried about him. But it's the voters they worry about. And it's also, if they're sophisticated up there, and I'm not going to attribute sophistication any more than I would here, if they're sophisticated, they worry about the Republicans in the Senate because they believe they should know better and not just be a rubber stamp for Trump. They really know that. All their politicians know it from one end of the country to the other. Because there's a lot of conservatives up there. I mean, that would identify with Ronald Reagan or with George W. Bush, although they didn't like the Iraqi war. Senior they really liked, and they liked Reagan. I mean, Reagan cut a deal on acid rain. It was a favor to Mulrooney. That's the kind of stuff they like.
Garrett, last word to you.
You were talking about the Canadian character, and it reminded me. My mind keeps going back to Jimmy Kimmel. He said that if the Blue Jays had won the series, you would have seen chaos in the streets in Toronto. Canadians would be turning cars over, and then they would turn them back over and put them back where they belonged and apologize to the owners. And so that's the difference between our two countries.
Well, but I could tell you a real difference. Because I was in Detroit when we won the World Series and somebody set a car on fire, although it was one incident, but it got national news. It was 1984, and Tigers was exciting. But I was in Toronto when the Blue Jays first won the World Series in October of 1993, sitting with the Premier of Ontario, and they won. I watched Joe Carter hit the magical home run. Place went wild. And when we left, here I am with the Premier of Ontario, a household face. We walked outside with our wives on the street alone, no security. And thousands were hugging each other. Strangers were hugging each other everywhere, cheering. They were hugging him and they were hugging me. Everybody was just so happy. Everyone hugging each other. There were no incidents, no crime, no nothing. People were out there for hours after the game. And I had to say to myself, a lot of our people in Detroit would have wanted to do that, but they would have been worried about strangers infiltrating it and somebody taking advantage of it and the police having to do stuff.
Night, yeah.
It was pretty amazing. So, part of the Canadian motto is peace, order, and good government or something. Yeah. Whereas ours is life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. But peace and order are well thought of up there.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. It was great to talk to you, and looking forward to speaking with you again. It's a future point.
Thank you. Thanks, both of you. Thank you.
Elbows up. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it for this week from the Washington Monthly. I'm Ann Kim, and on behalf of my co-host, Garrett Epps, thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe to our channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Have a wonderful week.